A monkey picture.
Looks like one of the cozies.
Looks like here.
So we're all good to go, Amy? Thank you. And thank you very much, Amy, for making this possible today. I appreciate that. And thank you particularly to our guests, Emma at the bottom and Mark alongside it. Thank you for joining us. And I'm certainly looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So we'll just go quickly around the room, starting with Amy. We'll say who we are, why we're here, and let's see if we can keep it to less than 15 seconds per person.
Kia ora koutou, ko Amy Anderson, toko ingoa, committee advisor for South Wairarapa District Council.
Morena, I'm Aidan Ellams, Martinborough Ward Councillor here. Previously been on Martinborough Community Board, so first time around on council.
Pretty good for me, advocate of the Martinborough Ward, and very interested in what you've got to say on this important topic.
Ko Martin Conley, I'm the mayor, and I'm hearing what Waka Kotahi say to us.
Kamaria, second court on GM operations and partnerships.
Kia ora, Violet Edwards-Hina, and I'm the planning committee. And yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Leonie Edwards, and I'm Māori Standing Committee as well.
Tamaria, so my name is Mark Owen. I'm the regional manager for maintenance and operations for the Wellington and top of the South Island. Waka Kotahi.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Inspector Koinua. I'm the Director of Regional Relationships for Te Manawa Timona, the Greater Wellington, top of the South, New Zealand. So, and my role is to represent the executive in our partnership with government, iwi, and other key regional stakeholders. We're here on weekend.
And over to you, Emma.
Okay, what I thought I'd do, I have what is, if you went through it all, looks like we've got a couple online, but can they speak or not?
One of them, yes.
Kia ora koutou, ko Pip Maynard, taku ingoa.
Hi, Pip.
Hi, and I'm a councillor for the Martinborough Ward, but obviously a councillor for the South Wairarapa District Council. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Waka Kotahi today. Ngā mihi.
Tēnā Pip.
And Alistair, 15 seconds to tell us who you are.
I'm Alistair.
Well done.
That's it, 2 seconds.
That was good.
Okay, so in terms of this presentation, what the actual presentation is, which I'm welcome to speak back to everyone afterwards, is it's a resource document. So it has a whole lot of information in it, and I'm not going to talk to all of it today, but we can follow up anything that people have got a particular interest in, and along the way we will answer the questions that Martin has raised. Or if not, we'll cover them as we go through. So I will just swipe us through. So what I thought I'd start with, I know some of you have been councillors before and you may know this, others may not. So I'm going to give you the introductory on the basis of what you need to know in order to be able to operate as a councillor and know how to interact with the central government land transport system, and whether you need to act, because there's some things that you need to do this year. And so we're going to look at the overall land transport system, road to zero, emissions reduction plan, and then I'll touch really briefly on the regulatory systems like highway management and other things, but those bits will be really there for your information unless there's a particular question. So, what do we do? What's Kotahi? So we're a crown entity, so we're a part of government, and we work in partnership with both government, iwi, DOC, a range of different partners around the land transport system to create a system that's safe, accessible, easy to use, and connects people's places and products from Tauranga to Aotearoa. We help plan in communities, so things like spatial planning is part of what we do to incorporate better access to public transport and cycling facilities. And we look at how new technologies and other things can help us to reduce deaths and serious injuries in the land transport system. So our organisation has 8 groups within it. Transport services is probably the one that you would see most often. That's where Mark sits, and they do the planning, designing, building, operating and maintaining of the state highway network and the work we do in partnership with councils on their road network. Regulation is a massive part of our organisation, so we regulate access to the land transport system for people and vehicles, and also the safe operation of the rail system. Customer services, that interaction through access portals for driver licensing, registration, and so on. System leadership, hiding in the back there, that's about how the whole system functions. Digital, as it says, regional and corporate, it's management business, people, culture, safety, engagement, partnerships. And that's all the people that have a major project, go out and work with every affected property owner. It's part of business. We have regional teams across the country, so Wellington, top of the south, is a region that you sit within, and it allows us to really think, because the rest of our business is largely organised as a national structure, this means that people who are focused on located in this region, who work with communities and work with our people on the ground. And we have a whole lot of information on our websites and links there about all of the different topics that are happening across the region for reasons. We also have our Te Mātangi group, and they work in terms of supporting us living Waka Kotahi, which is our Māori strategy, and we have Puarahi regional advisor Māori, who again work within the region to help support our relationship with just one thing I'll mention, we have a regional leadership team, so Mark sits on that committee, and the key regional leaders for the design, the infrastructure delivery, the communication engagement, the Puarahi. So we have a team of people who specifically focus on each region. So the Crown environment from which we operate, and this is really important for you to know about, because we're a Crown entity. What that means is that we're required by law to give effect to government policy. So if something is released through a government policy statement, which is tabled in Parliament, we're then our board is required by law to give effect to that. So if you as a council or as a councillor have a view that some of the things the government want to do are wrong, then you need to engage at this level with government in order to change those, because once they're put to us as a policy statement, we have to give effect to them. So you can debate all you like, all you like on particular things that we're required to do, and we can't have an opinion on that. We simply have to give effect to it. So just important, I think.
Can I just ask a question? When the guidance comes from central government to Waka Kotahi to the board, is there any opportunity, is there any discussion between the board and central government as to whether that, right?
We're in that process at the moment. So sitting over the top of the system, so the Ministry of Transport is the advisor to the minister on the setting of the policy. So they set out the overall transport outcomes, which you'll see reflected in all the documents, and they're looking at the overall framework. And they connect up, for example, with Kāinga Ora, with the housing, spatial planning, other agencies, in terms of thinking about that. This is our key document, government policy statement. So right now, we're in a slightly challenging position. The government has released a draft GPS signals, and then subsequent to the emergency events of Cyclone Gabrielle and its associated hail and the rain event, they've reconsidered their initial signals on the GPS, and so they are going to be re-releasing a draft GPS soon, and that is available for public comment and engagement. So this is a really critical opportunity for any organisation or individual who has a view on that to have someone got back to the Ministry of Transport for them to advise the minister. And obviously we and our board will have views and input and engagement with the ministry as that's developed as well. So the GPS sets out the strategic priorities. It tells us where investment needs to be focused and which activity classes are available. And it puts out on page 34, I think it is, there's a 10-year forecast of the funding ranges available for the board to invest within for all of its activity classes. And the board must give effect to that, and they must, when doing that, take account of the 10-year forecast and not operate outside of that. So, for example, if we have an activity class that is declining in size, they then have to manage very carefully, because if they want to start an activity that might take 3 or 4 years to do, they can't do it in such a way that overcommits future years in that activity class. So that's normal budgeting, but it is really important to be aware of that and to check in with that, because once that's set, we simply operate within it. The National Land Transport Fund is the primary fund that funds everything that we do. And it's what's called a hypothecated fund. So all the revenue from fuel excise duty and road user charges goes into this fund. It doesn't go into the central government office. It's very unusual in terms of Crown accounts. And it then can only be used for activities as set out in that GPS. We do get a little bit of other revenue as well. And one thing that we know, and so this land transport revenue review, is that we don't have enough revenue for a sustainable system for the future. So the Ministry of Transport's running a process to determine what happens in relation to that.
Can I ask a question in relation to that? How are you planning to deal with the lack of funding coming from electric vehicles?
But that's a matter for the Ministry of Transport to deal with.
I would have thought it would be a matter for you, because it's funding for you that you're getting that money from. And you're fixing it.
It is, obviously it has an impact on us, but the decision is made by the Ministry of Transport, the Minister, on advice from the Ministry of Transport.
So what advice are you giving to the Ministry of Transport?
We are working with them on the fact that we don't currently have a sustainable system, and they are looking at a range of options as to how to deal with it.
So this is, I find this quite strange, because that should be a very simple thing. It should be a very simple application of what you're doing. That is, you're losing money and you're not doing anything to recover it. It should be a very simple, straightforward, no discussion. You must do something to.
As I said,
I might just.
I'm really comfortable, Martin. As I said at the beginning, the government makes a policy, we administer it. The government has made a policy about exempting electric vehicles from road user charges and to achieve another of its outcomes, which is reduction in emissions. And so they've made that decision. They know the fiscal impact of that, and then this review is looking at the longer term. So it has been looked at
and your board will have impact or input into that at that Ministry of Transport level.
Yep.
Could I just ask something else? In terms of the partnership you have with the local councils in terms of the road work, would you just go a little bit more under that partnership. Partnership sounds like equal kind of stay.
Yeah.
I suspect I'll come to that. You'll come to that.
Equal, is it?
Can I ask a question about your revenue here? It's always wondered me why we have such a desire to avoid tolling in this country.
We talk about that too. Okay. So just looking at our revenue. So we have fuel excise duty, road use charges, motor vehicle registrations, tolling, and a few other little bits and pieces that comes into the and then we also have, first time in the current GPS, we were given permission to borrow. And so we borrowed an additional $200 million that went into maintenance of the state highway network. And in addition to that, we then also get Crown appropriations. So the difference is that if it comes in here, it is within the board's decision-making powers to determine what happens, so long as it operates within the GPS. So it will look at what are all the priorities, and then it will look nationally and set its own priorities. If the Crown, we'll go backwards. So if the Crown decides it wants to invest in a certain road or a certain activity that's not being prioritised by the board, or that the board doesn't have funding available to do so, the Crown can say, we would like you to do certain things. And in that case, they make a decision, not the board. So sometimes we have things going on within our portfolio that may be slightly counterintuitive or don't always look entirely consistent because there's different decision-making mechanisms. Alistair, in terms of your question on tolling, tolling is only allowed under the legislation in very particular circumstances. It has to be agreed before a road is constructed, and it can only be for costs directly related to the construction and maintenance of that.
And that's my question. Why, when we look at, if you look at Australia, for example, they've put the highway right through the centre of Sydney, from one side of Sydney to the other, and it's tolled, and it's built in such a short period of time. We seem to have this
Queensland.
mental block against it in this country.
It was a regulation that was put in before 2010.
There's quite a lot of rules around how it can be used and what has to be taken into account about.
So why can't we change those rules to enable you guys to build roads?
Again, that's policy.
I know, but are you guys in favour of this as a policy advisor, because that's one of your roles, is to advise policy? Are you in favour of it as an organisation to say, let's look at this because it is a way of funding future development?
We don't have a position like that. We certainly utilise tolling where we can. So on the roads that we have it, we've used it.
Who, I think, in my life,
Auckland and Tauranga.
Auckland and Tauranga. That's hardly utilising it when we can.
But for example, we couldn't use it on some of our roads down here because there's no alternative road. So when we look at the highest Pika, there's a section there where there's no alternative road.
Transmission gully could have been built 30 years ago if we had told.
Yeah.
Well, that's a different process.
My point is, do you have a position as Waka Kotahi advising the government and say, you need to seriously look at this if we want to actually develop roads quicker into the future?
Effectively.
We don't have a position to that extent. We absolutely use it when we have it available.
Okay, so how do we get you to have a position on this?
How can we help you?
How can we help you to actually encourage you to take a position and advise them? Because we're just a little,
Get easy on you.
we need a better road than Rimatakas, for example.
Okay.
We know we're never, ever going to get it under your current structure and your current funding model. The only way it would ever get built in the next 50 years is if we had tolling. So how do we encourage you
I
to?
might just move the conversation on here and make an observation that actually Waka Kotahi is not a policy advisor. And ever since about 1989, New Zealand has had a public policy position whereby the people who are doing the work don't get to give the advice on which work gets done. So in this case, the official advisor to the minister is the Ministry of Transport. So they may have a position. They may have even presented it to the minister, and the minister may or may not have rejected it. I do not know. But whatever comes out of that process, Waka Kotahi have to do it.
Can I just counter that a bit, Martin? Because in those days, there were three different funding options. There was Trans Fund, Transit, and Land Transport. They are now merged together. So you've shifted the position, you should also shift the responsibility.
Well, the responsibility for policy advice is
Really clear here, the primary policy advisor is the ministry. So for example, they'll be coming out with RTC in June. I think the dates aren't quite set yet. And that will be an opportunity for the members of the Regional Transport Committee to raise those issues exactly as you were suggesting, in terms of changing some of those policy positions on how you can do that. So absolutely, that is something that can be done.
So Emma, can I just add one more point to that? It's really thinking about, rather than pointing to a solution, tolling, it's really about how best to generate the revenue that reflects the usage, because tolling requires a lot of infrastructure and is not really effective way to gather revenue. So just bear that in mind, because when we jump to a solution, it's actually what is the problem we're trying to solve.
But Mark, to that same degree, tolling can add other infrastructural information that you're not getting currently.
Yeah, I mean, from a technology perspective, it's huge. But
I'm not saying it's the panacea for all things, but it just seems to me that it's an option that seems to be off the table in this country.
well, as Emma said, there's quite strict criteria at the moment about how you can apply it.
Yeah. So then we have current appropriations as well, and then we get what's called the National Land Transport Program. And then that is then invested through the activity classes, which we have also road policing and rail. So those things come in, and we have some separate revenue that will be coming in from rail as well as that system is made. So the fund itself is for the land transport system, although it does include a small amount of seed funding for coastal shipping. So, but as I said, revenue is mainly fuel taxes, road use charges, and I'll come back to this again. So what can we invest in? So if we look at the National Land Transport Program, so regions develop their RLTPs, regional land transport programs, but I'll come back to those. When all that information comes in, we look at what's already committed. We look at what continuous programs of maintenance, for example, public transport, road safety need to be included. And then we look at prioritising improvement activities as per the GPS priorities. And then there is an investment prioritisation method that actually helps us do all of that. And we publish that on our website. We're required under the regulations to publish that and make that available. I'll carry on. And so then we have the decision-making process for the region. We have the regional transport committees. So your mayor sits on the Greater Wellington one. And so every transport committee has representatives from local councils, regional councils, and Waka Kotahi, and Auckland and Wellington also have Kiwi Rail as members, and they prepare the programs and advice to the regional council that then gets submitted to the and we funding request through that as well. And that then forms our whole plan. This is really important. We're in an RLT this year. So the officials that support the RTC are currently working on this. And this involves bringing in information from every council, every road controlling authority, to say, what is it that you need to do to maintain your network, to plan for future, and to build new things, and then the overall plan for the region. There's a process that each region goes through to say, what are the key problems that we need to address or consider? What are the mechanisms we can use? What are our priorities as a region? And how would we measure success? And then that goes into the regional land transport plan, which is available on the Greyhound website. And then sitting in the back of that is a prioritised list of all of the activities. So if an activity is not in the RLTP, it cannot receive funding from the National Land Transport Fund. And there's a change in the new GPS so that if activity is not in the RLTP, it cannot receive any grant funding.
Amy.
What the key message in this is that I'll just finish this, is that it's really important for councils as road controlling authorities to think broadly about what is your 10-year or longer, because these are 50 to 100-year assets. So what are your long-term priorities for your region? And then work that through to what are your priorities for the next 3-year period, which is the RLTPs are for a 6-year and a 10-year horizon, but the most certainty is on the first 3 years. Pip, set her hand up for a while.
Can we unmute you?
Unmute.
Is there Pip?
You've got to unmute yourself.
You're on mute?
Yeah, I'm just trying to take it off. Sorry. Can you just clarify that? Because surely it's not locked in stone. How can it be locked in stone after what's just happened when it came to the flooding and the 100-year rather than a 10-year plan that then, you know, where we might be looking outwards to further than 10 years where we think something has a lifespan of say 50 years, but then it completely disappears. So, I mean, if we had a bridge taken out and it's not sitting in the regional land transport plan, would that mean there wouldn't be any funding?
No, of course not. These things can be changed. So the RTC meets quarterly, and when there are when it's necessary to make amendments, councillors will bring those through to the RTC, and those things will generally be agreed. But what it does mean is that there is a fixed amount of money available. So when one thing comes up the priority list, something else goes down, whether it's within a particular region or within the national decision making network.
My understanding is that's how come the Waihinga Bridge keeps dropping down, because it seems to get all the way up there and then get dropped down again. So yeah.
That bridge is, you know, we have asset registers for all of our structures, and we have over 100 bridges that are due that are on the forward list for replacement, and Waihinga is not on that list yet. So it's still within its lifespan.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask Pete, okay, you covered what's in the long-term plan, and as Pip saying, you know, the global warming, what's happening out here, you know, it's just happening all the time. And you say you have the quarterly meeting, but does that mean if we have a bridge taken out, it's a really important bridge, it's just after that meeting, how do we, there must be some urgent prioritization thing.
Yeah, road is
Yeah, so we have major emergency events such as we've had with the recent ones. Emergency systems kick into place. So there are alternative processes for those sorts of emergencies. It's just, it's like any system. We plan for and manage on what are the most likely scenarios that we can expect. And we also have systems to manage unlikely scenarios or less common scenarios. So, for example, we don't currently include in our planning all of what would need to happen if we have a happens. Yeah, and that would destroy the majority of our road network and most of our structures. Or the structures might be fine, but the approaches to them will be gone. So we don't plan for that, because actually the Crown is essentially sitting behind us in order to support us in major events. If it's a much more localised, small event, then we manage through those.
Shall I just explain a bit more detail about it? So if we apply that to, say, South Wairarapa, so you have, or we have a line item for emergency work within the plan nationally, and that's a bucket of money to deal with these sort of scenarios. That bucket has been challenged at the moment because of all the events over the last 2.5 years. The government came out and said, here's another $250 million, I'm going to top it up. And by the way, councils, when you have an emergency, you have your FAR, that's financial assistance rate. If there's an emergency over a certain value, you get an extra plus 20%. For the enhanced FAR, might bring up to about sort of 70%. That's also unique in this event. The government said, from an affordability perspective, we're going to allow you to have plus 40% on your FAR to do with the immediate response. So that's been made available to councils that have been directly affected by the cyclone, some extra money, meet the criteria to get on and do the response. So that emergency works is unique in terms of it has that flexibility to be able to deal with issues as and when they arise, as opposed to what Emma was talking about, any new things that we want to build. The roundabout on an intersection has to go into the plan, has to be consulted, and is prioritised along with all the other things against the GPS priorities.
So if the rumour Hunger Bridge went down overnight, we could get it fixed.
So we're talking about
Sorry, can I just clarify that as well? So as the FAR, so when that happens for local governments, is that just for roading?
So the financial assistance rate is for transport related outcomes that each council put through.
Fantastic. I just wanted to clarify that, because of course, if the local government was being given something, they'd probably prioritise water, things like that, for the people. But if this is just for roading, that's really good to know. Thank you.
Just for transport. So the key thing would be
Roads and bridges?
it's based on a trigger of your annual maintenance allocation. And as soon as you trigger 10% of that in an emergency event, then you're eligible for the plus 20% enhanced FAR.
But it's still subject to overall affordability. So we still have to be able to.
Can I talk a little bit about the transport plans here? That one of the issues that we have with this State Highway 2 goes through 5 towns. And we've got in the last probably 15 years, the level of heavy trucks going through those towns is exponentially increased. So the quality of life. And so when we're doing our spatial planning and things, we're saying, wouldn't it be great to have a bypass? Wouldn't it be great to have a bypass? To try and get it onto this sort of thing. When we mentioned it before, current councillors and current everyone, Harry said, we can't do that because as soon as you do that, it then triggers a whole lot of actions from you in terms of designation of land, future routes, costs, and so on and so forth. And so from small councils, we just feel we can't do this. How do we get a say or even get anything into this that actually makes a real difference? So if you look at Featherston and Greytown and Carterton, you see the logging trucks, particularly going through. The quality of life if we live in those towns now is significantly less than ever before. So how do we get something on here that says we need to look in 10 years, we want to have bypasses or something along those lines? How do we get that onto this without triggering designations of land, which then has costs?
Yes.
It is a tricky one because in terms of existing road corridors, you have permitted activities, and so they can go through them. In terms of Waka Kotahi's view on that, we look at the funding we have available over the next 10 years for improvements in the state highway network, and that activity class goes from a range start off around 900 million to 1.2 billion. In the first year of the current GPS, and it goes down to around 350 to 500 million in 10 of the GPS. You take out forward commitments paid, really paying for the fees, and we're left with a relatively small amount of money for all state highway improvements for the whole country.
Yeah.
So the board can't actually go out and pay. We intend to do things that we have no way reasonably of expecting that we can do under the GPS. So it is a challenging catch-22 because in order to really develop a proposal like that, you need to start with some planning and investigations and so on. And
But how do we do that? Like,
um,
how do we actually start that process, which is, you know, from, we're little old South Wairarapa and little old Carterton, and we go to the regional transport. Martin goes down there and probably argues the best case he can, but he's outvoted because of the way that the structure,
Big wigs get it.
the big boys get it, and we see the development up State Highway 1. Not criticising that development, but we are left here going, boy, we've got a roundabout that takes
No road.
12 months to build.
No road out. for us.
It just doesn't seem, and yet we are the breadbasket and the produce producer in the central region. We can't get our produce to market. So how do we start the process?
Okay.
so, and that is one of the challenges. So you can look at seeing if you can get direct government crown funding. So through that other acts, other input. So things like, for example, the current Riverlink project on State Highway 2, that's funded through the New Zealand Upgrade Programme. Otaki, the north of Levin, new state highway, that's funded under the New Zealand Upgrade Programme. So that has been funded directly by the Crown, saying we think this is a priority and not sure if you'd be able to fund it under the GPS constraints. So we'll put Crown funding in specifically for
That statement there is my prime issue, that the Crown thinks this is the best. What about the local voice that says, actually,
Yeah, we
all
know.
the money you're spending on State Highway 2, great, but actually, we didn't want that. We want to be able to get the trucks out of the towns. So
Yeah.
instead of actually building roundabouts and raise pumps and so on and so forth, all that does is actually, yes, it slows the traffic down, it meets your requirements, so on and so forth, but it doesn't take account of the local voice that says, we don't want these things in our town. We want State Highway 2
All the
go beside the towns. So where does our voice fit into this?
So you can put that into the RLTP as something that you can put that up as part of your regional contribution to that. But there is a challenge in there in that we don't have a plan for it. And so these are like anything. There are many areas where we don't necessarily have a plan for a new road corridor or something like that. And it is very difficult because when we look at what we can afford to do, we can't put that on the table. So in some cases, it means councils actually doing a bit of work themselves to make preliminary case for the kind of first step preliminary expression of interest in a new investment, because actually it is your voice, it is what you want.
That works for bigger councils which have funding. You know, when you've got small councils that have no funding and no fat in the system, that means our voice is not going to be heard.
I think the key thing is you've got to also look not just on the transport corridor, but it's the wider district plan. What is the vision for the region in terms of the growth, the demand, and what's going to happen? And then how can
spatial planning starts telling that? And I know I've talked to previous Carterton councillors and mayor about, well, if you really want to be saying that part of your spatial plan is to get set up at the town centre, then you need to be thinking about, well, how do you actually plan your town in a way that doesn't preclude that happening in the future? So thinking about, do you protect an area from urban development, from urbanisation, so that...
Okay, so we talked about that and Harry said, we can't do that because as soon as we do that, it affects property prices and it puts a determination on that land. And you know that as well as I do now. So we can't do what you're suggesting.
But councils do put urban boundaries.
Yeah, but we can't say we're protecting this because that's going to be the next corridor. As soon as you say that's the next corridor, then you've got to designate it and you have a problem.
So with you said earlier on in your presentation that you work with council on spatial plans and growth plans. What sort of work has Waka Kotahi regionally done with the Greater Wellington Growth Strategy, which is the two corridors of transport early along the rail links up into the Wairarapa and up to the Kapimana area?
Yeah, so the Wellington, so we've been involved right since the start of the Wellington Regional Growth Framework. That was started about 4 years ago. Our minister, along with the Minister of Housing, sits on the Wellington Regional Growth Leadership with Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, and our officers contribute to that. So they've been involved every step of the way in looking at the integration of spatial planning, urban housing development, and transport planning.
So primarily the focus was on the rail corridors. Has there been any discussion about state highway corridor and whether or not bypasses or bypasses of the towns on the state highway would be feasible? And would that be a mechanism for our councils to start escalating that concern into the regional and then, through Waka Kotahi to obtain other funding that you were the other funding that you were talking about was accessible, for some of those other projects that have already occurred?
It absolutely could be an avenue for those discussions to happen, because it is about integration of spatial planning and transport, and it also includes obviously rails, because that does create opportunities for intensification.
Yep.
We've got that note there. As to whether it's come up in the discussions to date, I don't sit on the officers level, so I haven't been involved with any. But it is certainly an avenue, and they are out at the moment going around looking and consulting with each part of the region on the future development strategy for the government.
Do you mind if I just ask a question? I do want to move on from this while acknowledging that the issue that Alistair raised it's reasonably critical. But I think what you're saying is it's not going to happen in the next 3 years. But let's imagine it's going to happen in the next 15 years. The question now is, what do we need to start doing today to get that process ticking over? What I'm wondering is, can we have some further conversations offline so that we kick that process off?
So we have what's called a point of entry, which is a process that initiates things. The challenge we have is that everything we do is funded through an activity class, so it has to fit within the GPS. And so there's a real challenge with building new roads, because the current GPS is not particularly supportive of that because of the other priorities that it places, and the next GPS is unlikely to, because it will have a very strong BKT reduction priority through it. So
I appreciate that.
So for us to fund a point of entry, we would have to believe it aligns with GPS and that there is a future pathway.
Just try and understand something further to what else is talking about. Within the structure, do you have a reference group or somebody that's going out looking at things outside the current framework? So if you're looking at new things, we're talking about changing the road or something like that. Do you have people within the organisation looking at those new opportunities to see if they do fit into a better picture for the transportation?
Yeah, so we have people that essentially are looking at that strategic long-term planning framework, and then they're connecting into also the council long-term planning frameworks on those things. Yeah.
So if they get an idea, how do they post it in?
Exactly the way we're talking about. They go through a point of entry, determine whether it's eligible for funding under the GPM, and then we would look at starting a project on it.
Could we get those groups to come and talk to us?
They seek input from Alistair, for example?
Well, they're normally going through a process, for example, working alongside the Wellington regional growth planning work. So Andrew, the guy that works on that, he comes to those meetings and he'd be looking at that going, what's the transport implication here, and do we have the ability to.
That's not quite explaining. I'm just asking specifically for Alistair's problem. He's talking about detouring around Carterton. Would anybody come to him and ask him, what is your plan? What is your thoughts on developing that?
Not specifically on a topic like that. It's done through the RLTP engagement as the opportunity for public engagement in that process.
Well, but we're not public, we're council. So how do we get our council to speak to this person, this organisation?
So, and I talked to Harry, talked to the mayor, talked to you, we can take that back into the business and say, where does this fit? Is there any capacity to do it? But right now, it's not going to align with where the GPS is focused.
I do understand that.
Know that there's people in the community who would like that.
So with the engagement for the new draft GPS, is there an opportunity there for submissions from council to make points about, projects or things which we see as a priority within our region?
Or to look at, for example, at the activity classes. And if you go to the current one and you look at the page and you go, okay, we'd like to see more of this and less of that, or relative priorities changed, that's a really direct way for you to say, we want to see the money changed, or you might want to feed back to the Ministry of Transport, say the overall pot needs to be bigger. And then you can say, and we would like these kinds of things prioritised. So for something like that, you're talking about an infrastructure shift that would provide for more reliable inter-regional journeys. Literally, obviously it would be safe, it would be a new road. It would enable a greater ability for a local community to access and connect as a community, because you don't have the severance of a state highway in your community. So you can talk about it in those sorts of terms, which are the terms that you usually see in GPS.
Right. So that draft GPS is what, coming out in June this year? Or
It should come out in May, and then there'll be some consultation meetings going with the ministry going to the RTCs.
Excellent.
But you can see these planning steps are really critical, because if you don't have your say, the other thing that will happen is that all of that process will happen, and then there'll be a general election. And what we know with our electoral system is that general elections lead to a change in the formation of a government. It could be a Labor-led government, it could be a Labor-Green coalition, it could be a Consensus Supply Agreement, it could be a national-led government, a national-act government. And at that point, if they determine that the current draft GPS doesn't meet their requirements, they will change it. In my experience, that's happened every time that there's been a change of government in this process. So that's why it's really important that your RLTP contains the full suite of things that you think about on a long-term basis. Because then if the GPS changes halfway through this process, it's a matter of going back and saying, okay, that was the previous GPS, it's a lower priority, but we've got something else that we've considered.
And it's probably just worth noting too that you have a challenge, and you also have to consult on your long-term plan, which is what your community wants, which transport's only one component of that. But you might find the priorities there are different from what goes into the RLTP, and that's your challenge. But we're bound by what the GPS dictates as a priority. So if you want to attract transport dollars to go against your transport priorities, it has to meet that. But it doesn't stop you in your long-term plan consulting on other stuff and doing different things, but you'll only get the transport dollar if it aligns to the GPS.
Then we can change their mind anyway.
So, as I mentioned, our LTPs get developed. They come into Waka Kotahi, and then our board has the responsibility to go across the whole thing and say what's most important nationally and what collectively will deliver against the GPS goals. We always look to do a certain amount of over programming in case for the list or change it as we go. We get challenged on this. So we've just been through a judicial review on the last one where a group called Movement had a view that we hadn't gone far enough in achieving climate change emissions reduction goals. And they said we should have done more in that space. And the judicial review found that the board had made an appropriate decision because it's balancing multiple outcomes. So these things can be challenged, but it's the board's accountability to to determine what will meet it. Just a picture of their activity classes. So we get given a range within which the board must operate. Occasionally then the
Coastal shipping.
allow us to change it. There are 11 activity classes and they're on the GPS, you can have a look. And
Coastal highway.
we must allocate our revenue.
Because some of our eyesight isn't quite good enough, can you just rattle through the 11, please?
So we've got public transport services, public transport infrastructure, walking and cycling, local road improvements, state highway improvements, road to zero, which includes road policing, state highway maintenance, local road maintenance, investment management, rail and coastal shipping.
You just see that coastal shipping.
That coastal shipping is that
Seed money.
ferries and stuff like that.
No, not for ferries, well, not for the Brooks Strait ferries, but it was how could we increase some of the resilience of our transport system by enabling certain coastal shipping activities to be explored further. And there were 4 successful tenderers. We got some seed money for that, including
Is it like the
services.
boat that goes over to Machu and all of that? Does it help them?
So which,
Boat that takes everybody over to Machu, ferries them around here.
Can I just ask, because that's very relevant at the moment, and I just wondered, have you, when you look at what happened in Hawke's Bay and further north, coastal shipping could provide a solution when we get the problems we've got now. How quickly do you uptake that change to get into the system? So what I'm saying is maybe coastal shipping could help us and could have helped us in times of need. So how are we going to build that resilience? Where does that get into you? Where does that get into your thinking now?
so again, the new GPS is one avenue for that. In the particular situation that we've had up there, for example, MPI identified that they had emergent need for shipping, so they underwrote commercial coastal shipping services now running between Gisborne and Napier. So there are other mechanisms. So we're not the only avenue for some of this, but there are other mechanisms that can respond quickly in this situation.
So what I'm asking though there is, I understand that, and that was a great move, and it should be a good move, but shouldn't that now be of a significant effect that you may need to shift it up the dial a wee bit to put it into, say, perhaps throughout the country we need better coastal shipping services, which we used to have, but have lost. And we should now be going back to them as far as transport goes.
Yeah, and look, that is a good policy question to ask. And yeah, there's quite a trade-off here because there's big commercial providers in that space as well. For example, I know Maersk has recently changed its whole coastal shipping in the New Zealand coastal shipping connection. So we're actually getting much better coastal shipping as a result of that, and that comes into effect this week. So there are other factors in here. It's not only the government, but there is a role. The government has said it sees a role for itself by looking at the GPS. So whether it now sees more of a role as a result of the need for more resilience in the system, as for that
You have a very large piece of.
I've had a hand up, Mr. Paul.
Yeah.
Still on mute?
Yeah, I know it takes a little bit for me because I'm only this big and I've got to try and find the button. So sorry everyone. I'm just wondering with regards to in a similar way what's being said about coastal shipping, but also rail. You know, it's sitting so low there. New Zealand and you know our area we have the means, you know, we've got Featherston, an area there that literally could be taking some of that logging off the roads.
Yes.
You know, during the day when that road is being used a lot of the time by small or light traffic or light vehicles, but all it takes is a couple of trucks, one going each way. I mean, I got caught up for 45 or almost an hour. Almost down, you know, like almost on this side, on this side of the hill, almost home, and then having to wait because all the cars had to slowly reverse because 2 trucks going each way couldn't get round a corner. It was too tight in the middle of the day, and then you have a massive backup either way. But what can Waka Kotahi do to try and help these large heavy vehicles perhaps change their hours so that way they're running at a different time where it's not impacting as much the rest of the traffic and the rest of the people?
And so a couple of things in there. That's not the full investment in rail. It's only the NLTF investment in rail. The Crown does significant additional investment in rail, and it's transitioning the rail investment into NLTF, and it's changing the rules and also changing. So we do the below rail infrastructure, funding of Waka Kotahi, and above rail has to be self-funded, the new model, rail. So that's all happening alongside. In terms of what can be done, obviously, Port set up work to set up Wainawa so that the substantial number of heavy vehicle loads can go through that route rather than and then they can also schedule that according to their ship timetable. Roads, the state highways, any vehicle within the designated weight and dimension limits is a permitted activity. So
I think the other point that Pip probably doesn't understand is that not every logs going over the hill are going to the port. Some of them are going otherwise, and that's why you have logs going both ways.
Straight.
And so most 90% of the logs now, in fact, probably more than that, are on rail that are going to the port.
But it's not just logging trucks as well. Remember, what I'm talking about is these ones that are carrying like 3 trailers of vehicles coming one way. So this is what it was, and the other one had logs. So it was these two. So it was a bit of an event, really. That I saw with my own eyes. So I mean, that's why I'm using that. But I'm not the only person, and I don't actually commute any longer over the hill. But it was always a little bit of a struggle. It didn't matter so much when it's early hours. But it's I guess my question is, we've got Road to Zero, but I'm wondering how Waka Kotahi talks to the ones that do have the really heavy vehicles, with initiatives perhaps to be looking at going earlier on when there's less traffic and less likely of being of having that log jam, because that's so tight on some of those corners.
Yeah, look, there's some specific things in terms of I know there's 2 corners on the hill that can cause some challenges, and we did a lot of shaving on one of those corners, which has made it a lot better. And often if it's the regular truck drivers, they know how to navigate and they radio ahead and so on. So we tend to get problems when it's a less experienced driver on the hill, but they are all permitted activities, and actually there's a real economic driver behind a lot of that in terms of getting products to and from ports or to markets. And rail, there are particular tipping points at which it becomes economic or non-economic, because you still have your last, what we call the last mile, although it could be many miles, when you go from a rail location to the actual location that the product goes. So to put some types of product onto rail and then take them off again and have to then transport them on, not always going to be. So I won't go into that anymore, but I know that we've got quite a bit of material to go through, so I'll just track on for a bit.
I wonder if I could just interrupt you, because you've done a very thorough job of covering a number of things that are on the agenda in front of us, but I fear we only have half an hour more. And I would be very keen to hear about Waka Kotahi's, if you like, current position with respect to the cyclone we've had. I'd also be keen that people heard about the roles and responsibilities of road and control authorities.
Yes, I'll get into that. So I'll crack on through this and I'll touch lightly so that you know there's information if you want to follow up on it. And you can have the presentation obviously, and then it's got lots of links to that. So the government will change levels here whenever they feel like it, but the key thing is to make any changes to the government policy statement has to go through the House. So it has to be tabled in the House at Parliament. So they're very visible public things. And so recently, board, so once the Crown sets its levels, the board operates within them. Board can change within the levels that the government set. So it's got a total sum and it can adjust within the ranges that's been given. So recently the board did that, and this wasn't to stop anything in particular. It was simply reflecting changes in what had happened. So it didn't change anything that was actually being done. It just said things are taking longer and costing more, so therefore we'll make some changes that. Funding assistance rates. So we mentioned that before, that's the rate that is set for how we co-fund on your local road network. And so currently you're at 52%, and then next year you drop down to 51%. So most councils are at 51%.
Which councils have got 75% and why?
That's the Islands.
Right. Are there other councils that have a high, so not just Chatham, but have a high 60 or 70%?
Gisborne's currently around 68%. I think it's probably one of the higher. There's a formula that sits behind us, and it takes into account the population, size of the roading network, deprivation index, and comes up with a calculation. But it's all relative, so it's not an absolute measure. What it does is it says for whole country, if someone goes up, someone else goes down. So it's trying to ensure that it is taken into account the conditions and the size of the network in each region, and also the ability to pay within that region up to a certain amount. It's not absolute measure.
It's worth just noting the change happened a few years ago. So there was a transition plan over a number of years. So it wasn't just an automatic drop or change it. It's transitioning back to that number. So that's why at the period of time.
Probably for us, the critical FAR is the Cape Palliser Road. I think that's been 100%, I think.
Yeah, so
Special purpose roads.
that road was a special purpose road, and a number of years ago, the board made a decision they would no longer have special purpose roads funded at 100%. So all of them were required to move back by next year into a normal FAR rate, or whatever the normal FAR rate is. In the case of the Cape Palliser Road, we have worked with the council previously to reach a position where there are 4 sections of the road that are particularly vulnerable that we would take a bespoke arrangement to our board to, and that's yet to happen, but that is still our intention. So the rest of the road goes back to normal, and those really vulnerable bits are different. When I talk about climate change though, that's very relevant about the future of that road. So that's that. Road Controlling Authority. Here you go, this is the legislation. If the authority, body or person having control of the road. So basically, you own it, that's you. And it's a public road, obviously set down under the various acts or district plans.
Can you delegate that?
You can.
So you could delegate in town to the council.
No, that's one thing. So we can revocate. So we can actually give it back to you. So if you want the section of state highway that's within the Martinborough town boundary to be under your control, we can initiate a process on your request to revocate it. And then we essentially transfer that back to you as your asset.
How long does that process take? What steps you involve?
It's pretty straightforward. If both parties agree and there's no sort of huge issues that need to be resolved, it's quite straightforward. You write to us, we go to the Ministry of Transport, and if they accept it, rubber stamp, and we get on with it. But just don't underestimate that some people like the tag of highway, particularly businesses. So just need to really carefully consult.
Sorry, what was that?
It will change.
Say that again.
Which piece again?
What was that last bit?
That last bit.
Don't underestimate that some people like the tag of being on a highway, particularly a business. It's quite a marketing thing to say, you know, Highway 53. So if it is taken away and becomes a local road, just don't underestimate that some people might react differently. It seemed logical and you think, oh, that's the right thing to do, but just don't underestimate that.
How does that work? State Highway 2, for example, second road in the country that we've got 5 towns in the Wairarapa. How would you see sort of handing back within those 5 town boundaries to local councils to manage and run?
It's slightly different because we provide a continuous arterial lifeline, you know.
State Highway 53 is fine because it ends at the square.
That's right. We can end
We've
it.
got 100 metres up the road, makes no difference to either of us. But State Highway 2, which has the issues about, decisions that Waka Kotahi make has a direct impact on the people who live in the town, who then we are responsible for.
And
It'd be really interesting to understand your view on how we could manage that in a better way.
I mean, if you look at us, to take the highway out of the town would be easy for us. We'd love that because it gets rid of all the dramas that happen in the town. But don't underestimate what the town's view is of that, because a lot of people do like the highway because it brings trade, it brings all the people into town, through the town, that sort of stuff. So don't underestimate, you get a whole range of views about people, whether they like it or don't.
So for that, specifically for Martinborough, because there will be a cost to council if we take control of State Highway 53 coming to Martinborough, because then there will be the maintenance costs incurred by council as opposed to Waka Kotahi. Will that also mean that, for instance, there has been talk about the need for a roundabout down at the entrance to town on State Highway 53, Kitchener Street and Princess Street intersection, where there's been a high number of accidents in the past? Would that, if it was no longer a state highway, would it then be easier for council to install a roundabout at that intersection?
I think the key thing is changing it is easy. Don't forget you get the 51% FAR for continuing to maintain that piece. So, but great money have to go into it. Just resurfaced it, so it's a pretty good product. Yeah. And then it gives you the ability to do whatever you want. But if you wanted to attract money through the GPS for us to co-fund a roundabout on your local road, it has to meet the GPS priorities. If it didn't, there's nothing stopping you spending rates money, developer money on building a roundabout. We had the example in Blenheim did that. They had a big developer, and so the developer helped pay for a roundabout on that road. So it gives you a lot more flexibility to do whatever you want to do on that piece of road.
So that example in Blenheim, was that on a state highway or just a locally?
State highway.
Right.
So if I'm reading that right, Waka Kotahi would delegate responsibility under part B there for the council to run the consent issues for the use of the road for Christmas parades and all those sorts of things. You could actually delegate to us to say,
but we wouldn't.
And so then I come back to my original point that your decisions have an effect on the community as opposed to.
And absolutely, any state highway that goes through an urban area or an area where people want an activity, because we obviously we're maintaining that key road. Now, in the terms of Christmas parades, we have always worked with those local towns to make arrangements. And so, for example, previously the Carsten Mayor came to me and said, well, we want to do a whole weekend bang along the frontages of all our businesses, and we're lining everyone up. And we have a road closure and a detour in order to make it better. And so we said, absolutely, we'll work with you and work out how we can do that and work together. So we do that, but
there's a cost, and the cost
there is a cost to it.
Traffic management costs.
The traffic.
Absolutely.
Traffic management costs for Rotary, for example, to run their Christmas parades is becoming.
Or the RSA for the Anzac.
Say for Anzac Day, the sheer costs of doing what communities want to do in their towns is becoming excessive. So those things are actually at risk of actually being cancelled because those organisations can't afford them anymore.
Well, they could just run them off the highway though.
Well, but it's their town.
Block the highway.
This is actually their town. It's not the council's town or Waka Kotahi's town. It is actually the town that live there. They decide how they want to live in their town.
And over time, the compliance and the bureaucracy has increased to such a level that
I don't want
it
to.
So I'm
prohibits
just going to move on because we're going to run out of time. So all of those things come in from local authorities, and then the regional council provides transport services, but often it's the local council that provides some of the infrastructure for those services. So it's just something to be aware of.
They'll make their own.
Our investment proposal is what we put into the RLTP process, just like you put your priorities and plans in, we put our priorities and plans in. So that's the same thing. And then as a road control authority, you must put your proposal into that RLTP process, and that's you've got a two-pronged process there because you're also putting it through the LTP process. And then all of that goes into the planning. So now I'm going to talk road to zero and climate, and then we'll come back to a couple of other topics that aren't covered in the presentation. So road to zero is a government policy. So as mentioned before, we're required by law to give effect to that, and the target that's been set for us is to achieve 40% drop in deaths and a 40% drop in serious injuries by 2030.
You better go.
So we have a program of work including speed and infrastructure, and I work with police on enforcement to try to achieve that. There's a body of work and evidence that sits behind it, and I won't go into it because we're going to run out of time, but there is a huge body of work, most of it's available on our website. In the Greater Wellington region, to achieve that 40% reduction would mean reducing previous number of 11 deaths per annum down to about 6. And that's deaths, and then serious injuries, taking it from 174 down to 104. Now, and serious injuries are your life-changing type of injury. Serious injury is always a good one to look at because they give us all the near misses to our fatals. And what we're seeing with the wider Wellington region has some particular characteristics, but some we can break down. We have lots of information that we can pull out as to what's the type of people involved in those statistics, what type of roads, what types of crashes, what types of speeds, and some of the other factors, were people wearing seatbelts.
People driving the wrong way on the road.
When I was policing here a number of years ago, LTSA back in the day produced every year. They produced a pamphlet on for each road controlling authority on what for the previous year the accidents had occurred. That sort of information, but specific to each road controlling authority. Does that information still come out? And is that still available?
Just as a matter of course, but we are moving this particular report down to a road control authority level. So we are looking to do that. But the road to zero approaches are built off what factors contribute to future crashes rather than necessarily what factors contribute to a past crash. So look at future probability.
Right.
But so there's just often, because often we'll get people saying, oh, well, where to crash here, fix this corner, fix this thing here. But 60% of crashes happen where we didn't have one previously. So there are some we just need to take that into account.
And do you also receive information as to how much traffic enforcement tickets or hours of policing have occurred in road control authorities?
Yeah. So we have, we have it by policing district, but again, most of those have geolocation, so we will be able to get it broken down to a more granular level. And we're doing a lot of work currently with police that's under their contracts with us.
So yeah, I'll be really interested to see that sort of data.
That's based on serious crashes in the last 5 years.
Just go back a bit.
Yes.
Go back a bit. I'm just looking from Greytown to Featherston.
Oh my God,
Oh my God, nothing. And yet we've had a reduction in speed, which doesn't meet
Because we're going
single
80.
quality of the things. So when Waka Kotahi came to this council and explained
the criteria for your speed reduction? Right, we go, yes. One of those criteria was met in the speed reduction from Greytown to Featherston, not one. And when asked officially why, it was, to keep consistency. Now, that doesn't meet your own requirements, but can you explain why that occurred?
No, I'm going to ask Emma to move on. I think.
No, it doesn't. It's not in the official information that has been presented and published in the local newspaper. Not one of your criteria was met.
Not going to comment on the local newspaper reporting. The safe and appropriate speed that was assessed for that corridor was 80 kilometres an hour.
Load bullshit. Sorry, absolute bullshit.
Excuse me.
Yes, I like 80.
That's what was done. So this is the thing that you need to know as a road controlling authority. So I sent a letter out yesterday that set out the deadlines that the Director of Land Transport has set for full speed management is in alignment with the new speed management. So the new deadlines are 5th of October is to produce a consultation draft speed management plan, and 29th March for submitting your final draft to the Director of Land Transport for certification, and they would then become live from 1 July for implementation over the next 3 years. So the 3-year implementation. So there's a lot more information sitting behind that, but the first priority in those is looking particularly at schools. So there's a target there around getting the speed reductions outside schools consistent by 2027, with 40% done by 2024. And most councils want to do that anyway, so we haven't seen much challenge with that. But this then sets out publicly what you are going to prioritise in terms of making changes to your the speeds on your road network. And then from that, once you've been through that initial consultation phase, once the speed management plan is certified, you can then go and implement those without needing to undergo further consultation on a road by road basis.
Can I just ask a question about the terminology? So you've underlined full speed management plans. When the recent speed reductions were introduced, that was under something called an interim speed management plan. So what we're talking about up here is presumably what councils like ours will accomplish. Is there another process whereby some of the interim decisions can be revisited?
If you're talking about the Featherston speed sign location, yeah, so we can certainly have a look at that and determine whether or not that should be moved as part of that process. But in terms of, for example, a request to revisit sections of State Highway 2, we can't increase a speed limit unless there are changes to the road environment that make it safe at a higher speed.
I'm stuck when there haven't been any accidents on the road that you reduce the speed. Don't they your own data? So I'm not sure.
That's why I said it's based on future risk, based on the form and function of that road.
Can I just ask something really quickly as well? In that previous one where there were a lot of red dots that I know I barely got to glance at it before we quickly moved on, and I'm not quite sure. Are we able to go back to it? Because it looked to me like we're concentrating in the wrong area when the majority of those red dots were on the other side of the Rimatakas.
Yeah.
So
are you able to flick back to that map just really quickly, just to so when we have a look, especially if you look through either the Hutt through to Upper Hutt, or you look through to Porirua.
Yes.
Those main roads compared to the Wairarapa Road is a lot more significant. So I'm just a little bit curious as to what the reasoning was behind there on the fixation because I mean, we're asking because we are the South Waiata Upper District Council and this has affected us. And so I'm just a little bit curious as to why this area was concentrated on, I'm sorry, I'm not there because I'm pointing at outside of the map instead of the other way and State Highway 1. Is it because it's State Highway 1?
So there are a whole range of other factors being done. So for example, on State Highway 1, we now have transmission gully, which means that a huge number of the crashes from the old coast road we won't happen because we've got a new high quality safe road there. And there are other changes to speeds and infrastructure elsewhere as well. So we're not saying that other places don't warrant attention or focus either.
So given the future growth strategy that came out of Wellington, Central Wellington figure, really interested to understand how, when there's been no accidents in the past, your data, how you are anticipating that there's going to be this raft of accidents in the future, which is your quote, you're looking for the forward. What is it that you think that no one else in this district can see, that all of a sudden we're going to have a massive crashes on this part of State Highway 2? What are you basing that on?
So as I said before, there's a huge body of work around safe and appropriate speeds and reducing risk, collective risk, road users. I'm not going to go back into that now because
Can you send it to us, please?
Well,
Yeah, the whole thing.
it's all on our website. So
I'm not asking that. I'm asking for a very specific body of work that says why you made a decision from Greytown to Featherston. Just that bit, because that is a bit that nobody in this district, no one can understand. Not a single person can understand why you reduced the speed. I can see Featherston from Greytown. There is one corner, which is the slightest bend, and there's been no accidents. And you sit there and you go, oh, we're worried about the future. Well, past behaviour is an indication of future.
Yeah.
And if there hasn't been a single accident or major injury, where is the justification? Because we're dealing with this every day with the people that live in this district. And all I'm asking you is to provide me the information that you made the decision on.
Yeah.
it's all been released. I'll find you the OIA.
Thank you.
So just the important thing here is that you must provide a speed management plan, and there are certain things within it, for example, around schools, that you must also do. So they are requirements under the speed management rule.
So to reduce the speed limit, if we've got two rural schools here in the South Waiata, to reduce the speed limits outside those rural schools, ensure, and I can't remember what the initial document says, but if it's down to 30 kilometres per hour, is it recommended to do drop from 100 down to 30, or is it a staged 100, 70, 50, 30, and then gradual return back up? Or is it just,
it depends a little bit about what you're doing in the corridor. So you might look at changing your overall speeds on some of those corridors. But then generally, so for example, rural school I'm very familiar with down in Marlborough, and you're on an 80k road and they have the school zone with the temporary speed reduction signs, then you drop straight down.
right, so it's not staggered or staged.
It would,
a little bit.
if going to do stage drops, it's a very long lead in, because I can't think what the minimum length is for a particular, for a speed change.
So it's all specified already.
If you take Hampshire School, for example, you might stop it further out because of the S-bend on the far side of it.
And it's like Paddy Law School, you stop before the hill anyway, it's like right down.
This is a really boring question, Emma, but the moment we put up the 30k signs, we're spending money. Is there a subsidy for that?
All right.
And how are we going to ensure that we're going to have those new speed limits enforced?
So part of the speed management plan is we do look at opportunities for enforcement, the new safety cameras. So safety
Policing, patrols, visible patrols,
Yeah. So
highway, road policing.
Police nationally and regionally on this, and so just got a new, sure which people, deputy or an assistant commissioner. Anyway,
They will change.
they're all changing at the moment. I'm not sure which hat everyone's got. But anyway, so Kevin's just taken over.
All right.
And he is absolutely committed to us developing regional and annual plans around how we're going to do this. So we particularly focus around schools at the start of year and start of term, for example. It's where we really drive compliance at the times when things change. And then it becomes part of the normal cycle of enforcement. But you can also identify in your network where you would like to see safety cameras in the future, and we're getting legislation changed so that we can use point-to-point cameras, we can use cameras that detect cell phone use, seatbelt wearing, and other things, so that they're actually a much more useful tool for us to deploy across the network. And they're coming over to Waka Kotahi later this year, and we'll be
So with the second point, are you also, when you take responsibility, also taking the, I think was that same word as?
So the funding currently goes into the consolidated fund. And we have put up a proposal that any revenue from safety cameras should go to road safety.
So that's only a proposal at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you think you win that one?
So with regards, sorry, Storm, with regards to traffic enforcement, previously when I was here, my KPI was I had to deliver 250 tickets.
Yes.
Some tickets a year.
Yes.
And that was per constable on the South Wairarapa. I haven't seen the figures, but with the enforcement or the visibility of police within South Wairarapa, I doubt that's happened. I'd probably be lucky if there is 250 a year issued in the South.
I'm getting one this morning, so
Yeah.
so Kate's doing a job after that last meeting. We don't set ticket.
I know you don't see it quotas.
But we do.
It was a police KPI measure.
Yeah.
So one ticket equated to 1 hour of traffic enforcement delivery.
So we've got a whole suite of measures that we have police. How they then divide them sub-regionally is something that we would need to have a conversation about. But again, it is something you can talk about in your speed management plans, and we can work with you in our meetings that we have in committee or other meetings we have with police.
Thank you.
This meeting.
Did you have a question on that? So emissions reduction. So you're probably broadly familiar with climate change, so I won't give you a lesson in climate change. Key thing to be aware of is the government emissions reduction plan that was released last year. The transport has to achieve 41% reduction in emissions by 2025. So again, this is one of those directives the government that we need to give effect to. And so we have three focus area: reduce reliance on cars, adopt an emission vehicle, decarbonising heavy transport and freight. So they're pretty key. And then we've been working through kilometre travel reduction plans, and just as a result of recent government announcements, we're focusing those only on tier 1 cities, so the highly urban areas, in the first instance. So there was always a phased plan of that. But I think the thing that's probably more relevant for a region like yours is adaptation planning and in terms of resilience. And Tino Rangi, which is our climate adaptation plan. So this was released December of last year. And this is the really important tool to really start thinking about how do we really plan around a system that is adaptive to climate change. Do we protect corridors?
Thanks, Elsa. Yeah. I'm going to interrupt there because I hate meetings that go longer than their scheduled time, particularly when I'm the chair, because then I feel responsibility. But look, I will invite one final question from anybody who's here, and Stefan's got his hand up first, so he's it. Then I'm going to ask Violet to say some concluding words so that we all go away feeling peaceful and happy.
I don't have a question, Emma, but I just want to say from a management perspective, how much we value the relationship with Waka Kotahi.
We have a partnership with you in terms of delivering our roading services, and it's a very successful one. It's a close one, and it operates really well. You've worked really well with us in terms of our SPRs, the Cape Palliser. Mark is always available when we have an issue on the network funding request, any question at all. He's really proactive. And we also get a high quality advice from you on major projects like Hanakura, advice on how to navigate the system to our advantage. So, from a management perspective, I didn't want you to go away today without hearing from me how much I really appreciate the way that you are with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And I think we would also say that we do see you as performing exactly as we would expect of a small council. So we don't expect you to have a massive team of infrastructure and delivery people, but we do see you carrying out your duties really appropriately and competently. So that's also really good to see.
Thank you.
A lovely way to end without a question. Anyway, that was great. Violet.
So, I'm going to read something, but I won't. So on behalf of us all, and in our Rangitani o Wairarapa, ngā mihi for your kōrero. I think we got a bit out of it, but I'd like copies of that, please. And I'm sure that in a little while we'll want you back so we can have a bit more of a discussion about a few more other things. Yeah, ngā mihi kōrua. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that, we thought I held you up and you didn't get through the whole thing, but next time maybe.
Yeah, we'll answer the rest.
But the rest is all here for you, and it's got links and everything else. So it is there to be a resource, and then if you've got questions.
Yeah, mate.
Thanks for answering all my questions. Great.
And thank you very, very much. Really appreciated. We'd love to see more of you. Obviously, we've got lots of questions that we're trying to fit in. But really is appreciated. And I just hope that we get to see you again.
Yes.
Because I think for us, I don't know about our rural roading, and we barely touched on it. So I think that will probably be our next good one. but no, thank you so much.
See you.
Good